gets in the room. We want to call the Development Committee meeting to order. Go ahead and rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ms. Hoskinson, can you take roll, please?
Yes. Carter,
Here.
Hicken,
Here.
Walther,
Here.
Alrighty, guys. So just so it's on the record, we'll go ahead and confirm the future development committee date. I have asked Kathy for the remainder of the year to fit us into the second meeting of each month. So we're already on the calendar. Hopefully, we'll try to do 5:30 each time, with the exception of July. It'll be at 5:45. And there will be a public hearing at 6:40, so that should give us 45 minutes and then a cushion.
The 24th, correct?
July 24th. Yep. Okay, with that, I'm gonna, are you gonna start, BJ, or you want Scott to go ahead with
We'll
the
just go ahead and
accessory
turn it over to
structure?
Scott to work us through the agenda.
Okay.
All right, first thing on the agenda is accessory structures. And in May of 2015, the regulations were changed to address the number of variances that had to be requested in order to build a shed, a detached garage, some of those things. The major points that were changed in those regulations were a reduction to setbacks, and the permitted size of an accessory building was changed. Ultimately, it resulted in now the size of the property dictated the size of the accessory building you could have on the property. It wasn't a sliding scale, or it was a scale before. It's like 0 to 1 acre, you had X, 1 to 2, you had Y, etc. It also had a provision that your second accessory building could be no larger than 144 square feet. So it kind of created some issues that we saw in the past that we attempted to correct. The setbacks for variances have been reduced. We haven't seen much change in the request for variances for size. With that, I have prepared, and this is attachment A, since these have been amended, so since May of 2015, the following applications on attachment A have been heard by the Board of Zoning Appeals. These are all for size variances. So with that, we have 13. There are still some that have been requested, but since the Board of Zoning Appeals hasn't heard them, those are not on the list. We do have some coming up that are for size. So we've had 13 variances for size. 100% of them have been approved. The average size permitted based upon these is 927 square feet. Average size proposed is 1,652, with an average percent increase over what's permitted by code of 138%. The minimum variance requested was 11%, and the maximum was 365%. And there's a provision in the code that says that it recommends that an increase in allowable square footage not be increased more than 25%. So with this, we get we've seen a number of variances requested, and we have to go through the process of taking in the application, neighbor notices, notice to the newspaper, routing these around to the other agencies for comments, preparing the staff report, getting the staff reports out, preparing the presentation, coming to the meeting, and it gets approved. So right now, I'm kind of looking for guidance to think if essentially this equates to a $300 rubber stamp, and we're having all these variances requested, the code really isn't working. So there's some options that I put on the actual report, just some that off the cuff just came up with, like, here's what we can do at this point. We can keep the status quo, and that if you need a variance, you come and get the variance, and we go through the process. We could adjust the formula that we use to determine the maximum square footage per lot to more accurately address the needs of the community. We could completely do away with the size requirements. We could increase the variance fee to encourage applicants to seek other or we could amend the code to prohibit variances exceeding a certain percent increase from being granted by the Board of Zoning Appeals. This is not a exhaustive list. This is just kind of off the cuff. This is some of the things we could do. My thought is having a $300 rubber stamp isn't doing anyone any good. So it'd probably be best, and in staff's opinion, from the Planning and Zoning Department, is maybe we adjust that formula to allow a greater increase in terms of the maximum permitted square footage. But ultimately, since if we amend these regulations, they'll have to appear before council. I thought I'd start with the Development Committee and just get some feedback to see what your thoughts were moving forward.
Scott, what is, do you guys know what the recommended size would be that you would?
But looking at this, it says the average percent increase is 138%. It seems rather large, but if that's our average, but we do have some outliers in the data that maybe we look at the median and look at that. Would delve more into kind of the nuances involved in each case to see was there some that clearly the regulations weren't applicable, that variance was clearly necessary, versus someone saying, I just had too much stuff and need a bigger accessory building. So at this point, I don't have a recommendation if we were to increase or to amend the formula to increase the percentage, but that would be something we would look into if that's the direction we wanted to go.
I guess I have your overview seems like everybody comes in, gets their approved, and it seems that way in here, but there has to be, I would think there's some discussion and some benefit to bringing them in front of the board, some change, some proposed, recommendation from the board or from staff coming through this process. Can you give us any enlightenment or any ideas or thoughts on that?
In terms of providing a recommendation to the board?
Well, no, to the applicant. The applicant comes in with their box of what they want, something that's 200 by 200 or whatever the case may be. And the board says, well, you know what, this doesn't really work here. Could you do 120 by 75, and could you screen it? Could you do this, this, and this? Does that happen when they come in for a variance?
No. From
Okay.
my experience, it's based just upon what they applied for, that I would like this, and there's really no negotiation of can you reduce it or
Well,
anything along those lines.
Change location, orientation, whatever.
Yeah, and it's not location orientation, it's just, I need it this big. They might ask, in the narrative it says why do you need this? Why are you requesting the variance? Like every application has a narrative that explains, here's why I need the variance, here's why
Right.
I can't meet the letter of the law. Some address that, some don't. We can't kick out an application if it doesn't have it, but very rarely is there ever any discussion in terms of, well, couldn't you reduce it, or just
I guess that's not really, I don't mean to reduce it, but change it in some way. It's something that makes it better. Maybe it's change material. Instead of having it be plastic, make it be T111 or
well, this is just size related.
Yeah, this has, they don't look at any materials or anything
Yeah,
for
this
this.
is
It's just
just-
strictly size.
Strictly size.
Okay. 'Cause I guess I have a couple other comments, if you don't mind. I think the alternative of outdoor storage is worse than, some of these places look pretty bad. I'd rather see it under roof than out on blocks in the front yard type of thing.
I would agree.
Especially in the rural areas where they have a lot of stuff. I mean, they have a lot of stuff because they're constantly fixing things and having to utilize that. So I guess that would be one concern I'd have. So you don't really ever get any residents, neighbors that come in and say, we support it, or we don't support it, or do you ever get any comment from the neighbors?
We do. Very rarely, though, does someone come in to oppose the size of the accessory.
Are they at least appreciative that they got the notice?
More, from my experience, more often than not, a lot of people come in, just say, I got this letter, I want to know what's going on.
Okay, makes sense.
I think what we probably need to address more than anything is the fact that we're charging people $300 to just go ahead and approve it on anyhow. I
That's
mean,
what I was trying to get to.
Right.
I was trying to get to, is there any reason to have these go through a variance process?
I think there probably is, and maybe we could come up with a combination of some of these. I don't think the answer is one thing on the list. I think it could be what, BJ, did you have?
Yeah, where these are located, Scott, are most, are most of these big rural lots? Do you know?
Yeah, there's some subdivisions, some large rural lots. It's pretty much all across the board.
The initial prohibition that was in the code, can you talk to a little bit to why that's there? I mean, I think I know what the answer is, because you don't want a shed that takes up your whole backyard.
Essentially, that was the thought. The intent, because it's one of those that if you had 1 acre, you could have the same size shed as 1.9. So there was issues with that people, wasn't based upon your property size. So if you're 1.9, you're lower than what you would be if you had 1. So you can see there's the discrepancy there. So the thought was, let's base it specifically on your property size. So it's property size appropriate based upon the formula. We used the same formula that was in the code before, so we didn't change that formula. And then we did away with the provision that if you have 2, only 1 could be bigger than 144 square. So I would speculate it's just so you don't have like a lot in a subdivision and your whole backyard's a pole barn. I think that was kind of the intent behind those regulations.
Yeah, I think that brings up a really good point, that we have a lot of different situations in Pataskala, many, 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 and they range from anywhere from the subdivision situation to a 5 acre to a 20 acre to a 200 acre type situation. And I know the 200 acre has a lot less restrictions on it than the 1 acre or the subdivision. Do you think that adjusting the regulations to fit, well, let me rephrase that. In the subdivision size, that they're getting these amendments, or they're getting these variances for subdivision pool barns, do you think that they're oversized in your opinion? Do you think they're getting too big?
In some instances, in my opinion, yes.
And then, so in the rural situation, when you're, 5 acres and above, do you think those are getting too big?
Some, yes.
Okay.
That it's not, and that's the unique thing, that if it were, I have a farm, I'm going to put my farm equipment and farm-related materials in this, it's agriculturally exempt. A lot of times what we see is it's not farm-related, it's, I have this, I have this, I have this.
I bought a boat.
Yeah, which even in some instances, we've had people just say, I got a bunch of stuff. That,
Bunch of junk.
yeah.
So there's not a hoarding fee then?
Yeah, there's some where it's, if that's your justification, it's like, I can't, it's not my job to critique your justification, but that is their justification for needing the variance.
And then the code doesn't have any, other than I think it's a 50-foot setback, or some type of setback in rural situations, I think it's 50 feet, but in other situations, they've got different setbacks. Is that really the only screening or the only requirement for location in the code?
Location, it's the side or the rear yard, can't be in the front, and then can't be in an easement. And then for lots less than, I believe, 2 acres, the setback is 5 feet. For more than 2 acres, it's 10 feet. For example, this was done to correct, if you have a 30-foot wide lot in the old village, if you had to be 10 feet from every property line, that shed smack in the middle of your backyard. So we were able to provide greater flexibility with that. From a screening standpoint, there are no screening requirements.
BJ?
Is there a way to look at, as we're talking setbacks and to prevent, somebody from putting a shed, accessory building in their entire backyard, is there a way to look at this with taking the setbacks for each zoning district and adding a percentage to that? Let's see if I'm explaining this right. So say there's 50-foot setback and you have 10 acres, 20 acres, whatever. Is there a way to say, okay, in addition to that 50 feet for any accessory structure, you must have an additional 10 feet or something? I don't know, to try to limit the size that these things are, so you're not covering an
Or the
entire
lo- Or
backyard.
the location.
Or the,
I think location's kind of a bigger issue in my book. If, you know, I'd rather see a
Well, we
barn
have
in the middle of a parcel than right up against the neighbor's, you know.
well, they'd have to meet the setback, which is gonna push them further into the parcel.
And I think the setback, that was the issue before, and we've
Okay.
corrected that. So I'd hate to go back to now, because setbacks really are not the issue. And it would then, because then we're looking at size. So if we were to adjust the setback, well, I still want this big thing, but I'm not gonna meet the setback. So we're kind of right back in the same boat.
True.
Ultimately, it boils down to the size of the accessory buildings that folks are looking to build. And because if you say, well, I want it this big, it's gotta be 10-foot setback, well, I get it this big, it's only gonna be 5, and then it's same issue, different variance request.
Scott, you mentioned that within the code, there is a percentage that it cannot be bigger than.
There's a number, and that's the size of the property multiplied by 600 plus 120. And that gives you the square footage for that property that can be divided amongst up to 2 accessory buildings. So if you had 2 sheds, that would be the maximum square footage per your lot. And that equation came from the code. We had just adapted it to the new.
And none of these, including the 365% bigger, violated that.
These all did.
Yeah.
That's why that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought in addition to what you just said there was a magic number, and that number is you can come in for a variance, but above a certain percentage, that you can't have that. Do we have that in the code?
Yeah, what that is, so we do the equation to get the maximum square footage for your lot. And in the variance section, it has recommendations for the type of, or the variance increase that should be approved. So it's recommended that your increase in accessory building size should not be more than 25% over what the code allows, but it's just recommended, just a guideline in the code.
I guess
Because
my-
that's- I'm sorry.
Tim. Go ahead, finish your
I was
thought.
going to say, because that's everyone but one.
Yes,
2, sorry.
yes.
Well, and that was my point. I mean, what I was going to say is I think that we need to maybe have language that says it's not a recommendation, that it is a drop dead number. My concern with that is, do we know what that number should be? And if we get that one exception, because you know there's always some weird situation that's an exception to the rule, and that's that's the drop dead number. Is there any way around it?
And that's the unique thing, and I probably have to speak with Mr. Zatz, but if the code expressly prohibits granting a variance that's an increase of a certain percentage, what happens if there's one that you have a legitimate case here, I can see the need for a variance, and then now.
Now,
stop.
everybody has one, and everybody has a need for it, so it's, what's the point?
Right. So the thought would be maybe we delve into these a little bit more, look at the merits of each of these cases. Was it, because every single one, there's a unique story involved, where some it's, just from my perspective, it's like that makes sense, or others it's, we probably could have figured something else out aside from a variance. So my thought would be is maybe we tweak that number, the percent, or that equation to allow for the percent increase, a reasonable percent increase over what's currently allowed.
It looks like we might also want to tweak size permitted.
That's what I mean. That because the equation is you take the size of the property times 600 plus 120, and that'll give you your square footage permitted on that lot. So is it one of those we multiply it by 700 to adjust the size so it increases appropriately rather than exponentially where it's pretty much free for all?
When you say size of property, you're saying in square feet, or you're saying in?
Acreage.
In acreage. Plus
So-
120. That just seems like it's adequate. I mean, I'm trying to just do a 10-acre parcel, and that's one heck of a building on a 10-acre
So
parcel.
if you have a 1 acre piece of property, you could have, if you do the equation,
Yeah.
it's 700.
There's 720 square feet,
Yeah.
which is somewhere around 43, 580. Just trying to find a percentage on what that is of your lot. It's gotta be,
What, that's 9 feet by 8 feet? Or no,
720,
by 8 would be 72.
I mean, 10 by 10 is 100 square feet.
Is it,
Be 90 by 80.
Scott, do you think it's a matter of that just more of the that maybe the formula is okay the way it is and more just need to be denied?
I would not question that train of thought either. We have had Mr. Zetz come in and speak to the Board of Zoning Appeals to say the variance needs to be based upon certain criteria that are outlined in the code, that are put on every staff report, that we do findings of fact at every meeting, that there needs to be something that shows that I would like to meet the code, but I can't, and here's why, instead of I just don't want to.
So really a hardship and not just a preference.
Correct.
Yes.
That's what the variants are supposed to be based on, is a hardship that for whatever reason you just can't do it. Not you have too much stuff, not you have an RV, you just can't, you've exhausted all other options to try to achieve what you want, and you just can't do it any other way. So it seems to me like applying that hardship rule, and I'm not going to sit here and tell somebody their hardship is not a hardship, but I think there are true hardships and there are just inconveniences for people.
The problem is it can be subjective, so it's hard to define hardship.
For example, a good kind of a textbook example of a hardship would be you have, let's say your lot is 102 feet wide. In this zoning district, you need 50-foot side yard setbacks and you want to build a house. That means you could build a house that's 2 feet wide. Clearly, the code is burdensome in that to try and meet the code you couldn't use your lot. So in that example, clearly a reasonable variance is in order to accommodate the construction of a house.
I'm just looking at a couple of these and I'm trying to figure out what it looks like. How big the lot is compared to how big the structure is. And obviously I'm looking at the 365, 282, and 224. You remember those?
Off the top of my head, I do not. Trying to think. Yeah, I mean, if I do recall, and not for sure, but the VA 16028, that was one, if I'm remembering this correctly, was I just have a bunch of stuff. And that was the justification they gave for, here's why I need an accessory building this big. Or it could be a combination of two. I already have one pole barn, I need to put another one in. So it could be divided between two, but still, the overall square footage.
Okay. Well,
I think, and this is just for me personally, it would be difficult for me to say I think we should take path A, B, or C unless I maybe could see a little more information about the cases. You know what I mean? Like, so I could look and say, well, it looks like 90% of these should have been denied. Or you look at it and say 90% of them shouldn't even had to come for a variance. So, and that kind of tells us which path we're on, which way we should be thinking of going.
well, I will tell you, just seeing the BZA operate, I mean, I've watched them, been at a few meetings. I think they take things pretty seriously. I would probably say it would be the other way. The 90% should never have been in front of them. They felt very strongly that they should pass. There's probably 10% that could have been denied and weren't, just because they felt like, well, I can't give 9 and take number 10 and say no to it. I mean, that's, I guess, how I would probably, Scott, you may disagree with me, but that's how I'd probably look at the board and how they do things.
Yeah, I would agree with that it's clearly, if we're 100% have been approved, clearly the board considers these to be acceptable increases.
So maybe the size parameter should be changed or increased. And then we should have a hard limit on, not a recommendation, but it's prohibitive above a certain percentage. So maybe those two things both need to be adjusted. I guess the recommendation would be, we would just need to know exactly like how much should we increase it by? That way more, and that would be a kind of an analysis, like what you said, taking those cases, looking a little deeper into them and telling us which ones you think, what percentage and what would be a better guideline for them to follow.
Okay.
I'd be interested to see if you also plug these 13 individual cases into that new and kind of see what falls out and what,
Yes.
okay, these, under these new guidelines, these 6 would not even have had to get a variance, which I'm happy with. The less variances, the better. But these 2 wouldn't have gotten anything and didn't have a chance at a variance. And here's what those 2 instances represent. So I guess kind of, and I don't know if this is the right thing, because I think it's nice to hear Andy say that he has seen them in action. I think I have, but it's been a while, and I like to hear that they're being conscientious about it, but also to give them a position where they can say, and us a position where we can say, look, you're not going to be able to build a storage facility that's 10 feet off just all the way around and just plunk it down. And now, whether you're, I think you run into the same thing that you possibly run into with the neighbors as well. I know if my neighbor said, hey, I'm going to put this in, it would have to be really bad before I would come into an appeals court or zoning appeals meeting and say, yeah, I'm not in favor of this. So maybe.
Maybe then you could, at our next meeting, come back with some models, a couple of different calculations using the cases that we have here and saying if we had this formula, this is how many would have needed a variance, a true variance.
Okay.
If we used this formula and based on your expertise, some idea of what exactly we should be looking at. Because I would certainly be relying on you for that number. I wouldn't be comfortable saying, well, let's just make it 35 because, so do you guys agree? You think that's fair?
And I think a top end, an absolute cap
Yes.
per different size, and maybe you're even going to break it down to 1 acre, 1.5, 2 acre, 2.5. So you get that extra. There's a big difference between a 1.5 and a 2 acre parcel. There just is, and what they can do on that parcel, quite frankly.
I agree.
I think there has to be a cap, and you can work your way all the way up to 50 acres, really, quite frankly.
Because I think the overall cap is 3,120. I think.
That's what I was thinking, because I know that there is a cap, and I think that there should be caps adjusted per acreage also. Because a person with 10 acres has a different cap than a person with 2 acres.
With that, though, that's why the allowable square footage was tailored specifically to the size of the property.
And I just did a couple quick calculations, and that cap is not even applicable when you get over
Right.
the 5 acre time. You get over 5 acres, it's gone. It's 3120 right there.
Right.
Okay, so that's what I'm kind of thinking, is that you instead of just having that cap on there, after you get over 5 acres, at 7.5 acres, there should be a different cap. At 10 acres, there should be a different cap. That's my opinion.
Because we could just remove the overall cap.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Make it specific to the size of the lot.
The only thing is we haven't come up against that cap on any
Oh.
property.
Give people a chance.
But they have.
They
in the
will.
past.
I've seen it. When I was sitting over there, I saw it. I mean, we had variances that came up to that cap and then some. And it was one guy that had a car collection.
Because that cap has not
He wanted like
changed
7,000 square feet, I
since-
think.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
Okay. Well, if you want to put some of those numbers together, and so we can come back and visit that next go around, that'd be great. I know we have some of stuff on this agenda that's gonna probably take a lot of discussion. If you want to go ahead and we can discuss the subdivision regulations.
Subdivision regulations are included as attachment B in the packet. how we've been approaching this is a three-stage process. Once we looked at our subdivision regulations, as we began this process, it was clear they needed a complete overhaul. It just wasn't some minor tweaks here or there, so basically, we pretty much scrapped them and started building from the ground up. And as we have built from the ground up, we have, essentially played devil's advocate as, is this weighted too heavily toward the city? Is it weighted too heavily toward the developer? Because you want to make sure that the whole process is fair to all those involved. But we do, at the end of the day, want to make sure that we're mindful that we're keeping the interests of the city in mind as we prepare these. So through this, as we've constructed them, we've played devil's advocate and attempted to try and, quote unquote, poke holes in what we're writing. How can we come up with a scenario where these would not address something? So as we've been going through that, that's kind of been our process all along. We're building it, but as we plug things in, we say, is this going to work? What if this happens? What if that happens? And then we've been able to move on from there. Once we have these constructed and in attachment B, the highlighted areas are areas that still need to be worked on. That being said, Alan did send me over an email with some additional things right before I came down here. So a lot of that gray area will be gone. Our thought is once we've put together a complete set of regulations, we'll sit down with the first draft, go through, make sure everything makes sense, try and poke some more holes into it, make the appropriate adjustments as possible, and then we will have a final draft, and that final draft will be ready for review by Planning Commission, Development Committee, and kind of work it through the code amendment process.
Do we have any idea what the time frame is on that? Sounds like
We're getting close. The hardest part is step one. Since we're kind of rebuilding them, once we get to step two, it should be pretty quick after that. Probably the next 2 or so months, I would estimate.
yes. Go ahead.
One thing I noticed, just glancing through this, and it may be in here, but, one of my concerns is when they're out there working in a large field or in a large area of development, we really don't require any type of wetland or environmental survey. Is that in this new regulations? And what I mean is more of a, not just a mitigation, but just an through their preliminary plan, have they had them delineate, has anybody walked it and had any kind of wetlands delineated?
Yes, that is required for the preliminary plan, final plan, that you submit and show the location of wetlands, all sorts of natural features on the property.
But do you require a certification by a environmental consultant saying, I've walked the site and there are no wetlands, or I walked the site and there are several areas of wetlands, and here is the delineation that I have completed?
Nothing's required because there's the inventory. I believe a lot of the engineering firms use the available data that here's where wetlands are located, but we don't require.
Right. Most cities, I've just let you know, just from my experience, most cities will require a letter from a consultant saying, I've walked the site and it's free of, for instance, it's free of wetlands. It does not have any wetlands on it. So then you don't have to worry about whether they're in conformance or not with the federal wetland mitigation laws. Because you're taking that consultant's word. You got a letter in your hand says, we stamp it, there's no wetlands out here. If you don't have that, what's to stop anybody from filling or doing whatever they want with either a stream or a wetland? Obviously, Blue Line are all documented, but there always are those gray areas that consultants need to look at, and the city shouldn't be responsible to tell them whether, yeah, that's a wetland or not.
Yeah, if that's something that you'd like to see added, that a consultant's required to
I
delineate.
can tell you the Westport Homes, they ripped one out. And I don't know if you guys had that in a delineation or not, but I guarantee you from 250 feet, I could tell it was wetland.
And those are all delineated on their site plans, and we talked about
Okay.
mitigating and doing a wetland buffer and things of that nature that, based
Perfect.
upon the information provided to us,
Right.
they delineated.
I'm just saying if there's something in the development or pre-development rules that they have to supply that to you, I think
From a
that's important.
consultant.
Yeah, from a consultant certification.
Scott, is there other stuff that you would like us, I mean, I assume the plan is for us to read through this and provide you with comment?
At this point, since it's still kind of fluid, it was just more of an informational piece. If there were certain things like Mr. Walter brought up that it was like, I didn't see it, something to consider. But at this point, since it's still fluid and things are changing, and then we'll have the second draft where things could change again. This was more informational purposes only, but kind of once we get that final draft, we'll
Okay.
be opening it up for comment.
I do have one other quick question for you. I actually spoke with somebody about an old subdivision that had a phase left to be designed or done. It had no stormwater, it had no drainage calcs, it had nothing because it was done so long ago. How would these new subdivision regs handle that? There wasn't even a development plan. This would have been done probably 30 years ago. This development was put in place, and there was a phase remaining to be done.
With that, a lot of these that people are dusting off have these old plans that if you got your final plan, it was good for perpetuity. There was nothing to say needs to be updated. So what we did is put a expiration date on that you get 2 years to get it done. If not, you can come back into Planning and Zoning Commission and request an extension of 2 years. So every 2 years, it will come up, just so we can't dust off these plans from years ago, and it's still good, even though clearly it is not.
Do you feel that there's any form or way of making these subdivision regulations retroactive to say a plan that was done 25 years ago that didn't require any of that, didn't even have a final development plan to get approved through council?
If it didn't have a final development plan, and I can't think of anything that we have that would be in that situation, but it
I
would
can.
have to have a final development plan. If they said, well, we don't have one, then we'd have to get one. And if it wouldn't even be, I mean, there's not even things that are platted that says, that has a valid plan that would put us in a situation like that. So from what we've looked at, there's nothing hanging out there that this was done 30 years ago. Phase 3 is platted and ready to go, even though there's no stormwater, any engineering done or anything like that. We've looked through old plans and we have nothing that are on the shelves that's kind of that weird nuance. Everything
Okay.
that we have on the shelves has some sort of plan.
Okay. Well, we can talk, I can talk with you offline on it. I think I know of one.
Okay.
So, but I'd like for the subdivision regulations to try to catch those, to try to make sure we're in compliance.
Yeah, and if they don't have a development plan, they'd have to, as Scott said, get a development plan, which they'd have to do based on these requirements.
Yeah.
If it's not
And
platted,
there's nothing, there's nothing else we could review it based on
This
except
one
for
might be the
these.
one challenge out there, so we
okay,
can,
but if it doesn't have a final development plan,
Might be
it
one.
hasn't been
Well, then we have no way to review it. We have no regulations to review.
that's what I'm trying to do,
If it
is I'm
doesn't
trying
have
to
a
catch it
final
with
development
this.
plan, it's not approved.
Right.
I mean, the onus would be on them to say, no, it's approved. It's like based upon what?
Right. Okay.
Okay. So we'll see, you guys can discuss that
Yeah, I'll
more,
talk with them.
and we'll table that one for a couple months. So wait for you guys to make some progress. I appreciate that. I know that's been a tedious task. So.
Undertaking, yeah.
Okay, food truck regulations. I know you guys have had some challenges with this in the past week or so, so,
Yes, so food trucks essentially is handled through a solicitor's permit through the police department. And this is for, if you're a food truck, if you're a door-to-door vacuum salesman, et cetera, you go get a solicitor's permit through the police department, and for $25, you can have it for 30 days or less, or if you want the whole year, it's $100, and you can go wherever, and there's no oversight from parking, signage, hours, where you can locate, where you can't locate, signage, any of those items. When we did get requests for food trucks, we had no idea there were regulations for food trucks in the code, because nowhere in the index or anything can you look up food trucks and find it. So we used the temporary activity permit, which essentially is like outdoor sales. Like when Kroger has their parking lot
Plants.
sales, we kind of, to make things work, we used that until we found these regulations that, oh, clearly we shouldn't be doing this. So with that, the solicitor's permit was crafted in 1985 and included food trucks. So with the rise in popularity of food trucks, staff was recommending that we look to create regulations for food trucks. And I've highlighted some bullet points down there that as part of the permit, we'll look at the location, hours, signage, parking, how long the permit is good for. We would require something from the health department saying that it has been inspected, just to make sure that we're not saying, you'll get that right, and, oh, sure I will, and now we have a food truck with no health inspection in the community. So it would be something that we require as part of the permit. Any outdoor storage, and those are just some of the things that, off the top of my head, that these are some of the things that would need to be included in the regulations that would address these and make sure that, while permitting food trucks, we would do this more responsibly. Because right now, the regulations for a solicitor's permit is pretty much some general information, name, address, telephone number, etc., and then proof that you're employed by the company that you say you work for. So if it's Hoover Vacuums, you're going door to door, you get a letter saying, yes, you work for Hoover Vacuums. So I can understand from it going through the police department, maybe as doing background checks, since these folks are going door to door. I don't think it's as applicable to food trucks as that maybe a background check wouldn't be necessary, but more from a zoning perspective, we could look at the food trucks and make sure that we're doing them in a more responsible nature with some clear regulations to make sure that some of the problems that we've seen don't arise again.
How soon do you think something like that could be completed?
Arguably by the next development committee meeting. I know there's a lot of communities out there that do have food truck regulations that I think we could adapt relatively easily, and kind of with this outline, unless there's anything else that we can think of now or in the future, we can certainly add that, but we kind of have an idea based upon the problems that we've seen in the past, some of the things that we need to address. So I think reasonably by the next development committee meeting, we could have a pretty good draft together that we could proceed with.
I guess I have two questions. You and I have talked about this a little bit only by happenstance. We started talking about something else and it kind of bled into this. So I guess I have three questions. The first one is, would you think about changing the fee? Are you thinking about, or are you thinking about doing away with the fee? You just have to make the application.
I think there should be a fee, just like for all permits, applications, that we do a fee just to kind of cover the time spent on the work we put in, just kind of
Okay.
to make it a fair trade.
The next question, or something to think about, is it the owner of the property or the owner of the truck? Who's going to have the onus on them to? I mean, are we expecting the owner of the property to? And sometimes it may be us, right? So are we going to kind of think about that? Can you just be a food truck and stop on any street? And maybe the answer is yes. I don't know. I just like to something to think about when you're doing that. And then the other one is a mechanism to waive fees if the city is specifically having some type of a 4th of July food truck Friday, something like that. Turning your permit, we want to see that you indeed are cleared by the health department. We don't want you passing out botulism at our stuff, but in order to get many trucks, if it happened to be that type of a thing we wanted, we might be able to waive the fee. Just thoughts for you to think about when you're putting the language together.
With location, as with all of our applications, that you can have an applicant, let's say it's a fence company. If the fence company is the applicant, you as owner of the property still have to sign off as the owner. So if a food truck came in and said, I'm going, in this parking lot, we would still require the owner of the parking lot to sign the application saying, I'm aware of this and I'm okay with this.
Okay.
So then that way, with it, if there's an issue, you have both parties involved with the food truck. So we do that for all of our applications just to make sure that we don't have an instance where someone's coming in and doing something without the knowledge of the owner. And then with waiving of fees, there is something that we can go through city council to waive fees. Typically, if it's a nonprofit organization, like if the church putting out temporary signs for Vacation Bible School, for example, we typically will waive temporary sign fees for that. So in a way, there are mechanisms in place that we waive fees by, we can go through council or department policy, but if it was like a 4th of July food, like we had a bunch of food trucks for 4th of July, I think the planning and zoning department, we would just look at it as it's a city event. We would do it for informational purposes. So we do have record of what transpired, make sure that we have everything on file, but in the future, 10, 15, 20 years later, that maybe the policy has changed, it might be something that we can put in there to just say, here's how, if it's a community-funded event or something like that, that we do have the ability to waive fees expressly in the code.
Yeah.
Andy?
I've got a couple questions. How do you guys handle the street fair right now? How does that permit work?
That permit does not come through the planning and zoning department. I think it's an outdoor activity permit.
So the food vendors down there
Yeah, the
don't need
outdoor
to,
activity permit, and I'm not sure if the permit is applied for, but an outdoor activity permit goes through the city administrator, I believe.
Correct.
But it's not something that goes through the planning and zoning department.
so you could have food trucks, so let's say you had, I don't know, outdoor carnival of some type, and it's just a fundraiser for something, and that event has 10 food trucks. You wouldn't get a permit for those food trucks, you just have an outdoor activity permit that may or may not say there's food trucks.
Correct. The outdoor activity permit does include the provision for food trucks. I believe it's listed on there. So that's because we're looking at that as a bigger event, whether it's the power show or 4th of July fireworks or the street fair, or if the city had a food truck festival or some organization, it'd all be encompassed under that.
But
So this would be for your individual standalone food truck is what we're talking about.
But isn't the purpose of this to try to get that health inspection done, try to protect those users of the food trucks, whatever? Isn't that what this permit is really for? I understand what you're talking about. You got a guy that's gonna stay out here on
Right.
on Route 40,
Right.
maybe down by the auto parts or the auto care store,
Maybe.
and wants to sell burritos. He could get a food permit that way.
It would be a food truck permit.
But if he
correct.
was in the street fair, he wouldn't have to get one.
Correct.
And then the party held responsible if something were to go south.
Is
Would
the
be-
application holder.
Yep, so that would be whoever put on the fireworks or
Yeah.
the street
And
fair
they're
or whatever.
required to have, I know with the street fair specifically, that they do have the health department come out and do all the inspections.
Okay. So in some of these events, there's a lot of nonprofits that are actually out there who are sponsoring the event or whatever the case would be. How would the city monitor a food truck just parking on during that event? Say it's at a park. How is this? Did the city turn that down? Is there a mechanism for saying, no, we're not going to give you a food truck? Say you give them that year license, they could go anywhere, anytime, and set up at any place. Correct?
Currently, yes.
Okay. Is
Currently,
that what you're trying to correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
We'd like
Yeah.
to, have a little bit more oversight to make sure that it's in an appropriate location. Because arguably, right now, someone could go to the end of a cul-de-sac and have a taco truck.
Correct. That's what I mean.
For a year.
Yeah, for a year.
So we're trying to correct that and have a little bit more management on this because they're coming more popular, and we just don't want them. And I'm a big fan of food trucks. Don't
I was
get me
gonna say,
wrong,
that'd be
but
super
I could
convenient.
see it, for instance.
I
at
just
the-
don't
at
want
the
it to become a
municipal pool.
nuisance.
I could see it at the municipal pool, the Hawaiian
There's a good
treat
example right
place,
there.
Yes.
whatever, shaved ice, whatever they call their places. They just come up, park in a parking spot and sell shaved ice all day long. They didn't pay, they paid their $100 or whatever the fee would be. And that seems counterproductive to a municipal or a city-run park
Yes. Yeah. That has concessions.
that has concessions,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
No, I agree.
Okay, I just wondered if there was a way to say, sorry, these are things you can't do
Certainly is.
under this yearly permit.
Well, and I don't even see them having a food truck license for a year. This is going to be a totally different time frame than doing it for a year. A year is a long time, with that example, we could, actually, I think we had one, heard we had one that wanted to go in the old Summit Town parking lot out there. Just set up, and I thought, that's going to look awful, traffic flow in and out. Way it is now, they go to the property owner, get permission, they could be there for a year.
Yeah.
So essentially, you're setting up a year-long restaurant
The
there.
peddler's permit has no means by which to decline.
None.
All right.
The other thing I do want to mention about, as we're on the topic, the peddler's license, looking at that, I came to realize that there's no times that you're allowed to go door to door. If you get it, you could go at 1 a.m., you could go at 1 p.m. So I want to get that changed so people aren't being inconvenienced during nighttime hours where there's nothing that says what days, what times, anything. So be looking for
Weekdays, sundown to sunup kind of thing.
Yeah, and there's nothing right now. That's a minor code change, but as we were on it, I wanted to mention that I'll be bringing that to council to change.
What about things like an ice cream truck? Does that fall under food truck as well, or?
When it's moving?
Kind of goes neighborhood, well, and I'm just thinking
One
about
that the
that,
kids
because
are chasing?
That's an
the
excellent
one that
question, because
frequents my neighborhood.
Because the way the solicitor's permit now, it says a mobile food service operation, so arguably that's what it would be, but I don't know if the ice cream trucks are going to do that. This would be more for someone going to an area and stopping and having people come to them rather than them going to people like an ice cream truck.
Okay, I got
I
that.
think we try and make that very specific to these and very clear that this is what this is for, not for like an ice cream truck
Right.
operation.
Should we be more aware of things like that, though? Is that something that we should pay attention to?
My personal belief is that the police department should certainly pay attention to if there is an ice cream truck. They may have a peddler's permit. I don't know if they do or not.
Okay.
Meaning, have them stop in because,
Correct.
I mean, there's your background check
No doubt.
example, right?
No
I
doubt.
mean,
Yes, that's definitely what I was
Let's be honest.
talking about,
I
right?
mean, there's cliches all over the place when it comes to.
The music, yes. Okay. Are we good on that? Alrighty. Knocking them out, Scott. One more.
Last is neighbor notifications, and right now for BZA, Planning and Zoning Commission, there's an application within 200 feet or 2 parcels, you will be notified. The 200 feet is easy. There's a program on the auditor's website. You plug in the subject parcel, put the radius, type in 200 feet, it spits out a list of the adjacent property owners within that radius. Problem comes with the 2 parcels. Based upon that, it just says within 2 parcels. So you play the game of 1-2, 1-2, does the 2 corners count? Some of those types of things that you create an arbitrary process by which people are notified. That I could read it one way, the applicant could read it another. So then we create a process by which to go through and to attempt to confirm were these people on the list, were they not? Those types of things that essentially you have to print out a map and start going 1-2 and playing that game to make sure that the address list that we were given is correct for this. Also, if you do the 2 parcels, sometimes you will have essentially creates a donut around a property or properties whereby everybody around this was notified, but the person or people smack in the middle are not notified. So that creates issues where it meets the code, but to justify that to someone who didn't get a notice when all their neighbors did, it creates kind of an issue with that. Also, with some of the larger parcels, you can do 2 parcels and people will be a mile away. We've gotten calls from people saying, why did I get this letter? It's like, well, you're within 2 parcel radius as defined by the code, and they said, I'm a mile away from that. And it's arguably you're a neighboring property, but being a mile away isn't necessarily a neighboring property. So the thought would be that we define a radius greater than 200 feet. Right now I'm throwing out 300 feet. that there's nothing arbitrary about it. We can go to the auditor's website, plug in that 300-foot radius, it spits out the list, and the list that the applicant gives us is the same one that we can create, the same one that anyone else could get the exact same list, and it takes the arbitrary nature of that out of the equation and kind of streamlines that process. Also, when we send notices out to people right now, we say within 200 feet, you receive this because you live within 200 feet or 2 parcels. We could clearly say you're within 300 feet of the subject property, and this is why you received it. That it's a very clear and definite way to notify people rather than the arbitrary 2 parcels.
Makes sense to me.
Makes sense to me.
Any questions?
I don't. Well, I guess I have one. You know, I'm going to go to the cell tower example. I mean, when you get into something that's a large feature, would you change that? Would you have any kind of notice? Would you be able to vary your notice requirements?
My thought on that is we would keep it standardized. Some of the issue with the 2 parcels is you can still go 200 feet or 2 parcels, and you're not getting farther enough out.
Correct.
So to have it on kind of a sliding scale would be difficult because it would leave it up to us to determine what is the appropriate time to implement the greater scale provision in the code that is like, well, this is an important one, so we need to make it bigger versus, because then it gets into who's making that determination. So my thought would be, if we wanted to bump it up to 400 feet.
I guess let me qualify just a little bit, because in the cell tower, it's a 500-foot residential property within 500 feet, correct? I think that's the way.
That's not the notification procedure,
understand, but
that's the location
That's
where.
the
yeah.
location, so I would think that would be applicable to notice also. Whereas a 200-foot go ahead.
I think we pick one and keep it standardized just to prevent any concerns where somebody may say, well, you know, if we say 500 feet and someone's 600 and we look at the code and it says 300, just so we're not left in a position where we're trying to justify why we sent letters to a certain segment of the community based on we thought, oh, this is a bigger deal than something else. I think we just keep it standard, keeps us safe, and we can justify it and have supporting documentation for why we did what we did.
What's the part of the code that was just mentioned that talked about 500 feet?
In a conditional use, there's certain supplementary or additional conditions that the board should consider when someone applies for a conditional use. And one of those is such use shall not be within 500 feet of a residential area, something, and I'm paraphrasing, it should not be within 500 feet of a residential area. It's something that if they choose to apply it to a particular application, they can, but it's not required.
Because I'm kind of thinking, what I'm thinking about now is areas of the city that are so vast that 200 feet is,
There's nothing there.
you're going to get 2 people.
Right.
When they may legitimately be doing something that affects more than just 2 people.
I agree.
So I don't know, how do you, 300 feet isn't going to do it in an instance like that.
That's a thought. I just put it at 300 feet.
Well, if you go the opposite way, right? I think if you go the opposite way, then you're going to be notifying people all over the place. Every time somebody wants to, I don't know, rezone a piece of property that happens to be next to a neighborhood, you're gonna send 26 letters. And the idea I think we're trying to do is make it so that the people that are immediately affected are the ones that are affected, and at the same time, okay. I don't know how to solve that, but I think it's a legitimate concern.
Yeah, the goal of us bringing this up is just to make sure that there's nothing that could be arbitrary in the whole process. It's a clearly defined radius that we can plug into the auditor. It spits out this list, and it can be replicated by anyone who tries it.
Could you change it based on area of the city, or would that not be necessary?
I'd keep it one standardized size, and regardless of where it is in the city, apply it.
I mean, for example, the cell tower case is a unique one. A lot of times you're not going to get the cell tower, you'll get a shed, or you'll get a conditional use to do a daycare. that certain things, if you go in the large swaths of the area, people 2 miles or 2 parcels away on large pieces of property
They don't care.
wouldn't know otherwise that there was a shed going there.
Okay.
But then if you move it in, if you go with a large radius and you're in a subdivision, you're gonna have people 2 phases over that'll say, you know.
What the heck do I care if I put up a shed? I got
And
you.
it's a unique situation just because of the character of the city. But our goal is just to remove any arbitrary nature from it, just to make sure that it's easily replicated and we can easily justify, here's where the list came from.
Because right now, technically, we're seeing 2 parcels, so.
Right.
I mean, you could put up a big cell tower and not notify, you know,
Yeah.
many people at all.
Yeah.
Versus,
Because the 2 parcels, then you start to.
Right,
one,
so you just
two,
kinda-
1, 2, 1, 2, does
Like,
this one
which way-
count? And then
yeah.
you get into that, every time you get into, does this one count? Well, we better notify just to play safe.
Just in
but then,
case.
Does this?
so this takes any guesswork out, so there's something for us to say, nope, this is where cut off and why, so.
And I've got that, and it looks like the backside, or the backside solution was to increase the radius slightly.
Yes.
Okay.
Whether it be 300, 400. And that's the thing, if you go into the more rural areas with the size of the properties, it might be notifying less people. But due to the distance sometimes that, you know,
Okay.
I'm not gonna notice that shit.
Well, I'm
So,
all, I'm all
cell
for,
tower, well, is a good example, but it's where arguably we should notify more people, but, it's difficult when, cause that was a unique situation where we had that one.
okay.
So the majority of the time it's,
Well, I'm all for removing that arbitrary parcel thing, so.
Absolutely. Any other business that we need to bring tonight?
I just wanted to mention one other thing. It's the comprehensive plan, just making sure we talk with council about, you know, how we're gonna move forward. I know you in your report, Scott, you've mentioned it several times that you're working on certain things, but we've gotta wait for this, committee, just for lack of a better term, committee to be put together, and how we're gonna do that. Is it gonna be each council, is it gonna be similar to, the review committee for the code, or for the, whatever, you know, how are we gonna put together this committee? And so I think that's worth discussing at least at the next meeting, Mel,
I agree.
to try to come up with a game plan to make a recommendation to council.
We'll find out where we are. PJ?
The only thing other thing I wanted to mention is on your desk, there's a 2-page exhibit. And we were approached by an attorney representing a developer. This is property that's located behind Coghlan. It's currently in Harrison Township. They gave it to us, asked what we thought. This is a 19.6 acre site. We're looking at very heavy densities in this thing. The one plan has 256 duplexes, the other has 290, which goes to 13 units per acre, and then 14.8 units per acre. They asked about the interest of annexing into the city. Scott asked me about it, and we advised this is something that the administration would not recommend doing. Council may not accept the annexation. They did ask for the opportunity to come and speak to this committee. So that is up to, the committee has to allow people to address the committee during meetings. This just seems like, granted, it could look nice, it's just really high density and just doesn't seem like it's a quality development.
Is it in the township now?
Yes,
And what are their regulations? What would
I
they?
have no idea.
Yeah.
No
Could this happen with or without us, basically? Is that what, I mean, that's my question.
If Harrison Township would allow it, yeah, that they could
But I
certainly allow
don't, I
it.
don't think this fits Harrison Township's
I doubt it.
housing
I would
requirements.
like to know
Speculative
that.
saying
Yeah,
that's
I
why
doubt
they're
it.
looking to annex
Yeah.
and increase density.
Would you just do
We'll
a
find
little
out.
more research on that
Yeah.
before we tell them yes or no? Because I would like to know every detail about it and
Sure.
before they would
Yeah.
stand before us.
Yeah, and we just got this, so
Sure.
I just don't know what, we can certainly look. I doubt that it meets any of Harrison's Township's development
This
requirements.
doesn't look, just at first glance, it's not
No.
something that looks great, so.
No.
Okay,
That's all I have.
All right, guys.
Make a motion to adjourn?
Second?
Roll call, Kathy?
Carter,
Yes.
Higgin,
Yes.
Walter,
Yes?
Meeting adjourned.
Evening.
It doesn't look
Good.
dumb.
Beat the rain.
You did beat the rain.
Just by about 10 seconds.
Man, it was coming down.